Okay, we're continuing to talk about the four values that are key to understand America, Americans' political system. Slides number 24 to 30, I've kind of already talked about this, so I'm just going to leave it to you to kind of read. I'm just going to focus on one thing here before we move on to individualism, but the quote on slide number, 27, from President John Adams is a good idea, again, of how our founders thought about liberty and how it might be preserved. Okay, so this is a speech that President John Adams, as president, gave to the Massachusetts militia on October 11th in 1798. And he said this, he said, "We have no government armed with power, capable of contending with human passions, unbridled by morality and religion." Okay, so we talked about the fact that government must operate within the environment of some form of morality, some form of religious expression, okay? In other words, that's what's supposed to control government. That's what's supposed to keep government at bay so that government doesn't become a monster, okay? Avarice, ambition, revenge, gallantry, again, these are all negative aspects of human nature, would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and a religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So he reveals something, again, we're talking about, think of the golden triangle of freedom, right? Freedom requires virtue, but then virtue requires faith, but then faith requires freedom. Okay, they all have to simultaneously operate if you're going to continually have sustainable freedom. And what Adams said is the way our Constitution was made, it presumes people that are moral, people that are religious, i.e. self-controlled people, okay? If you don't have moral, religious, self-controlled people, our Constitution is not worth the paper it's printed on. You're not going to be able to restrain people, okay? Again, this is thinking that is largely foreign to most Americans today, because most Americans today think freedom is the right to do whatever I want. Okay, that is not how they set up our system of government. Because if everyone did whatever they wanted, you'd have chaos. Okay, you've got to have people that understand that your mission, should you choose to accept it as an American citizen, is to be a self-controlled, self-governed person. In Adam's case, to be a moral and religious people, because the absence of which means in other words, there's no constitution, there are no words printed on a piece of paper that it's strong enough to restrain a group of people that are unbridled and do whatever they want, okay? Again, food for thought. Again, this is, if it's really true that contrast is the mother of clarity, it will do all of you well to think through the implications of what he's saying here and then compare it to how we tend to think today, okay? Which begs the question, is the freedom that we have today a perversion of freedom, or is it a continuation of the freedom the founders wanted? You think that through, okay? Individualism, okay? Let's talk about this. Actually, sorry, before I do that, let's jump back down to slide number 29. Probably need to talk about this too, okay? This is a particular quote from Alexis de Tocqueville. Alexis de Tocqueville was a Frenchman, came to the United States in the 1830s to look at the American penal system, looking at all of our prisons. But basically, when he got here, he became so fascinated with America that he proceeded to write all about it in a 2-volume set called Democracy in America. It's a classic, okay? Well worth the read. And the reason Alexis de Tocqueville is so important and Democracy in America is so important because it gives us a picture of, a snapshot of what America was like at its founding. Again, in the 1830s, we're still very connected to Americans' founding in the way we thought. And this is what he said in a section of, again, talking about freedom and religion, okay? He said this, he said, "Upon my arrival in the United States, it was the religious atmosphere that first struck me. As I extended my stay, I could observe the political consequences from which formed this novel situation. In France, I had seen the spirit of religion moving in the opposite direction as that of the spirit of freedom." So in other words, freedom and religion were seen as opposing. Okay, to be religious, to be moral, hinders your freedom. Okay, that's how France thought about it. But he said, in America, I found them intimately linked together in joint reign over the same land. So what he's saying is, is that at America's founding and some 40 plus years afterwards, religion and freedom were seen as best of friends, okay? In other words, you can't be free unless you're religious and moral. And you can't be religious and moral unless you're allowed some form of freedom, okay? How is it today? Okay, it's like this. It's like the version of France. There's a lot of thinking in American, in the public square in America, within the intelligentsia in our country, that religion and freedom, they don't go together, okay? If you're religious, you can't be free. But in the founding and the way they set things up, they understood that those two were not mutually exclusive principles. Again, I'm helping you as you do some of your discussion posts. That's why I jumped back and paused there to kind of help you. Okay. So let's look at individualism. Okay, slide number 31. Okay. Again, talking about key values that makes America America. It's a commitment to personal initiative and self-sufficiency, which is critical in a new nation without government aid, welfare programs, etc. Okay, a key value in America is this idea that, hey, I can do it myself. I can create, I can make a good life. I can forge and move forward myself without the help of government. That's a big part of what makes America America. Because again, if we think it through, as the pioneers and the settlers and the pilgrims and the adventurers and the explorers were making it to America's shores in the 1600s, there was no government going, hey, here's your welfare check, and here's your Social Security check, and here's your free health care, and here's your food stamps. In other words, there was none of that. You either shot your own food, or fished for your own food, right? Fished for it, or grew your own food, or else you die. Okay, so there's this very real sense that, hey, I'm kind of individualistic. I got to make it myself because no one else is going to be helping me. Okay, that kind of thinking was very, very different than people that were in the old world in Europe, okay? And that fostered this idea of personal self-initiative, okay? A good idea of that captures this, again, I'm borrowing from Alexis de Tocqueville. If you can't tell, I'm a big Alexis de Tocqueville fan. I'm a big Democracy in America fan because it gives us some great clues as to the thinking that made America America. But if you look at slide number 32, this is a good example of this idea of individualism within America. When a private individual meditates on an undertaking, however directly connected it may be to the welfare of society, he never thinks of soliciting the cooperation of the government. In other words, if you're building a house, building a barn, building a fence, building a road, they never looked at government. In other words, they were thinking, hey, I'm going to do it myself. So he says they don't solicit the cooperation of the government, but he publishes his plan, offers to execute it himself, courts the assistance of other individuals, and struggles manfully against all obstacles. Okay, a do-it-yourself individualistic or individualism culture. Undoubtedly, he is less successful than the state may have been in his position. But in the end, the sum of these private undertakings far exceeds all that the government could have done. So he acknowledges, listen, the government probably could have built a better house, better road, whatever. But the point is, because every individual American is doing this throughout the country, you got millions of people. Guess what? All of these private undertakings, okay, the private sector is going to be far more significant, far more powerful, far more robust in creating a flourishing culture than the government would have been if it had controlled every step of the process, okay? Again, very revealing. That's this individualism I'm talking about that's a big part of a value in America, okay? So what contributed to it? Again, I've already kind of hinted at it there. If you go to slide number 33, you look at the fact that, again, early Americans were explorers, settlers, farmers, inventors, okay? They did a lot of this on their own. Okay, that was a big part of it. Okay, and then also a big part of it was the Protestant Reformation. Again, in the 1500s, you had a group of Christians that broke from the Catholic Church. Okay, they were protesting many of the abuses within the Catholic Church. And one of the things that they began to emphasize is, listen, I don't need to go through a priest or a pope to get right with God. I can have a relationship with God on my own. okay? I don't need that, okay? So salvation was connected to your individual faith. And so the reformers emphasized personal responsibility for your own. In other words, you're going to answer to God by yourself. You're not going to hold anybody's hand and walk before God. It's just you and God. And so because you're individually standing before God to get things right before God, you are morally responsible. Guess what? You're also responsible for a whole host of other things like, I don't know, maybe building your own house and getting your own food and taking care of your own family. In other words, this idea of self-reliance was fostered by the Protestant Reformation. And again, the way America was even founded to begin with. Again, all of the explorers, settlers, pilgrims, and so forth, okay? And de Tocqueville says here, again, if you're still looking at slide number 33, one of the things that Americans really wanted to be is to remain their own masters. They didn't want to give over mastership to the government or somebody over them, okay? Again, there were lords and ladies and kings and queens and monarchies over in Europe. Again, the pilgrims and those that came over to our shores wanted none of it over here, okay? So that's why our tax rate, because of self-reliance, is about 25% of gross domestic product because of economic self-reliance, whereas in Europe, okay, because many of those nations are socialist, government control of so many areas and so many entitlements, their tax rate is between 35 and 46%. In fact, in some nations, is pushing 50%, meaning when you take home your paycheck, half of it's gone because it's been given to the government. Again, less freedom, more of a willingness to let the government take care of them, okay? I'm actually reading a book right now called Post-War by Tony Jute, and one of the things they talk about is after World War II. It's a book about how Europe rebuilt itself after World War II. And a big reason why many of these nations went socialist, where government controlled everything, is because, again, it was all obliterated after World War II. So many sectors of Europe were just bombed to smithereens or overrun by the Russian armies or the Allied armies. And so you just literally had nations in chaos. So people in Europe were far more willing to go, hey, government, help me. And they've chosen to perpetuate that even today. Whereas in the American experience, we didn't have any of that. We had a lot of self-reliance for hundreds of years. And again, that is the reason why we tend to bristle at government control over a lot of things. And that's why our tax rate is less. Okay, I'm going to stop right there and begin with equality next.